Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our second to last Summer Salon series of the year. And it is a real treat to have Rina Banerjee and Gary Goodeye presenting tonight. I will go as fast as humanly possible and get through this, but we have some very important things to say. One is, I said it's the second to last Summer Salon series, so we really hope that you will come back next Friday night. We've got a fantastic round of updates on all these projects we've been working on all summer with different artists, and they're going to come back and tell us, you know, sort of what has happened over the course of the summer with their Summer Salon Series project. Two, we would not be able to do these types of projects if it wasn't for some very generous people, and I would very quickly like everyone to help me in thanking our Contemporary Arts Council for helping fund the Summer Salon Series this year. And if you want to know anything about the Contemporary Arts Council, I'm going to embarrass Bill Stern right here. You can come up and talk to him. But that's a fun group, and they really do care about the museum. And like I said, they put their money where their mouth is, and they help fund all these projects. So thank you to them. And also, I'm sure he's probably right in front of my face, but David White, the co-curator for the Summer Salon Series. David, stand up, please. Yes. David and I put this together every year, and so what you're seeing when you come to the salon is just as much David's vision as it is anybody else here. Tonight at the Summer Salon, we have Rina Banerjee. We have all summer long been exploring these ideas of historical fictions, exploring the ways in which information is disseminated, and really even talking about how we tell the story of history. What are these narrative constructs that we create to tell the grand story of history? And Rina Banerjee, for over a decade, has been actively engaged in looking at how the connotations and the meanings that we associate with certain objects can help us talk about the construction of identity and the construction of history. And what does it mean when you start investigating the possibility of multiple interpretations of history being able to coexist at the same time? And it is no mistake that we also have Gary Goodeye presenting tonight. Just as Rina Banerjee's work explores these ideas through objects, ideas like cultural migration, so too does Gary Goodeye's work talk about this mapping of cultural migration, only his presentation will be through sound instead of objects. So after Rina's talk, I encourage you to stick around and go up and see an artist present from a donkey cart in our galleries. Rina Banerjee was born in India, lived in the UK, and is currently based out of New York City. And she went to Case Western University and walked away from that amazing institution with a degree that was not in art. It was in engineering. And I think after only a few short years of being a polymer engineer, thank you, she left all that behind, enrolled in the Yale University School of Art for painting, and has been kicking butt in the art world ever since. Thankfully for us, she left that engineering job. And her exhibition history really is too vast to try and summarize, but suffice it to say that she has exhibited at some of the most important institutions and in some of the most important exhibitions in the visual art world, including the Yokohama Triennial, the Whitney Biennial, the Musée Guimet in Paris, the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City. And I don't wish to privilege biography as a tool of analysis, but I will just tell you very quickly, if this talk is anything close to the amazing lunch that Rina and I had, the conversation that we had at lunch, you all are in for a real treat. So Rina is gracious enough to entertain some questions at the end of her talk. It's not every day in an encyclopedic museum that you have a living artist to talk to, so I encourage you to stick around and do some Q&A with her afterwards. But for right now, please help me welcome Rina Banerjee.
Well, thank you for inviting me and allowing me the opportunity to share my work with you. Today, because of the context of these tapestries, I'm going to try to focus on how I imagine and reinvent history through the works. And Obviously, this includes a personal history that I discover through the history of the world, and if it is possible to have a single history in a more connected world. One of the things that I'd like to do is to be able to share with you my early works in chronological order, it seems, and then at some point I kind of stray away from that and veer towards understanding how certain materials come into the sculpture and then revisit the drawings, which happens later on in my development. The work that you will see will span the time from 2000 to the present. Of course, they're selective, and I hope you enjoy. It is a lot of images, so I may be going too fast. If you want me to slow down or stay with a particular image, just raise your hand and I can do that. If you have questions, I can entertain them too. One of the other things that's true about the slides, or I should say the images I will show you, is that the titles will be available for some, not all. The titles that I invent as well are quite dense and long, and you'll only get a moment to read them and hopefully enough time to read them. So I do apologize for that. Okay. This work is an example of a series of sculpture that I make that I call wall-mounted sculpture. And they arise because my first interest in talking about the vine, if you could imagine, a lot of my work has to do with mythology, and the vine in itself is a recurrence in the work, which sprouts from the wall into the space. It reaches out in the way that an arm would or a limb would, and imagines that a story is told like the tree of life. It delivers fruit as well as poison. And so there is this kind of play with the temptation of telling the story, and whether you are telling the truth or a lie, and how invention can then both entertain and also bewilder the viewer. So all this is very important to the work as I discover more and more objects that I want to work with. And so the vine, the branch, the tree, and then later on architecture, figurative work comes to play. This first work is uses Charlotte doll. I'm going to attempt to use this. There it is. Wait a minute. Right over here. A lot of the work uses dolls, things from textile history, shells. This is actually a spoon. It's a Chinese spoon, which is used for fried goods as well as tea strainer. So I use everyday objects as well. The rest, you can see what they are more easily. And I think one of the things that continue in my work with all kinds of sculpture, both architectural as well as figurative, is this presence of the organic versus the inorganic, synthetic versus the natural, and also false items, things that represent what is there in the real. For example, a porcelain horn is not actually a horn, but a representation of a horn. So that is very much part of the play that takes place in the objects that I choose. This is a work from 2000, and one of my very early sculptures, as I think Alexander was saying, I went to school for painting. So I really started making sculptures once I was out of graduate school. And in that occasion, my sculpture was very thin, you might say, but very large. And the way that I worked was to create formats in this particular situation of deity worship. So you have a central figure, and then you have a format of a spatial region that is very shallow behind it. This particular work is called Infection Migrations, and it had a relationship to the AIDS epidemic that was part of what I was thinking about at that time. Below you will find that there is a mapping. It's an engineering drawing. It's a found object that is a hand drawing, unlike what we find today, which is done on the computer. And it's a found object because I found it in the streets. And so these drawings were used then to make the sculpture. It's a drawing of a hospital and in particular the ventilation system and electric system in the hospital. So I'm really talking about this idea of the migration of disease and the connectivity of human beings towards that kind of uncontainable infection. The biennial was, in my experience, the first time I really seen a group of curators come together to do a curation, which was really an amazing experience because of the collective response towards entertaining a wider world than what was then delivered in the museum as American art. So it was really the first time you're seeing in New York a kind of acceptance of an international world and trying to make the idea of American identity an international proposal. This was in PS1 MoMA. This is a piece for, some of you may know, the Greater New York Show, which is a big survey show. Here again, you know, I'm really interested again in that sculpture that is very fragile, very thin, uses historical objects like suitcases. There's an early colonial candlestick table that has been inverted. There are two of them. That's the red piece you see here. There's a horn. There are eggs. Some things are made. These are actual banana leaves. So this kind of accumulation above both organic as well as objects, furniture, and then fabricated. This is kind of an inverted umbrella. This is a project I did in Japan, which is part of a series of sculptures that I made that was modeling the Taj Mahal. Again, the Taj Mahal was an interest of mine, not only because of my identity, but the way we represent culture and the way we understand a place that is far away through tourism. So the architecture of the Taj Mahal then becomes, in some sense, a transportable object. And uniquely, I found that in Japan, the people in the town that I was making this piece did not even, let me see if I can, know about the Taj Mahal. So it was a really almost pleasant surprise to really learn what this piece meant to them if you were not in the situation of being part of that tourism. And so the journey of becoming familiar with your own history is very much one that is something unexpected when you encounter difference, a difference in history and access to information. One of the things that this project allowed me to do was to use all the materials that you see here from the school. This is a schoolhouse, and this is from the science and geography rooms. And so these objects were then put together to make this piece. Again, you see horns. I chose these two classroom objects because geography and science are the beginning of globalization, to learn about the world, the greater world. This is a piece that is quite large, actually, and this had more to do with the story of Jules Verne and the whole story making and fiction that is surrounds mostly colonialism and empire building, which is the unbounded expansive world that needs to be encountered, settled perhaps, or explored. So it kind of mimics a balloon, if you can imagine. There's actually a sofa in there, which you'll see in the next slide. And so there is this kind of almost overabundance of things that is carried up into the air that makes it impossible to move. This is the sofa. And these are shells on it that are sewn on. This is a bed, and a very Indian bed that usually you see outside nowadays, that transitory people who are using a bed temporarily outside would sleep on. There's a figure on this bed. Here's also another large piece. This is, you may be familiar, I'll Get You My Pretty comes from the Wizard of Oz mythology story. It also references the Ramayana, which talks about the journey of leaving home and being lost in the forest, which is one of those mythological kind of happenings that appear in many cultures. The idea of journey, and the beginning of journey is losing that place that is your home. Of course, in this kind of balloon lantern on the floor, this is a detail of the map of the world in shell with camels and old bottles. There are little palm trees made of feathers, and the camels are transformed into mythological beasts, ready for easy transport. This is a piece that was done not so long ago for a solo show, and this also had this aspect of flight that you saw in the balloon and in the lantern, to really talk about our understanding of migration and the will and the kind of desire to ascend, maybe even to the heavens. You know, this idea of being freed from land, from wanting land, from desiring home. This work was made for a specific show that was about war. And so, as the title, as you see here, reads, She's at War. The world as burnt fruit. Also, again, referring to the reoccurrence of mythologies about fruit. Certainly, we are familiar with Adam and Eve and the first temptation of fruit and knowledge and the curiosity of knowing the larger world. Again, I'm trying to refer to this in terms of the present condition of trying to connect with the rest of the world that is so far away, and sometimes very close as well. What this kind of anxiety for the knowing of the world is, and what the responsibilities are for that knowing. What you see before you is, again, that recurrence of that dome that you saw earlier in many of the other sculptures. Certainly a lot of feathers. There's an alligator. This is a girwal, which is known more in Asia, has that long snout. So the specificity of that. It is a replica. It's not the real thing. And here the globe swings out. And this is that word girwal, which is an Indian word. The other thing that I use a lot are light bulbs and amber bottles, vials sometimes. I often refer to medicine, as you saw in the first image of the infectious migration sculpture and my reference to AIDS. And again, we're talking about how this body is the body that all living things have, in some sense, really referring to our evolution from the smallest animal to the largest, the mythology of creation is also a mythology that is entertained by science itself, its discovery of the mystery of life. This is a piece that was in your neighborhood in the YBCA not so long ago. And so it's a fairly new piece, and you can see from it, again, the use of horns. In this case, it's these horns, again, replica. They're American buffalo horns. And this is a very popular identification for tourists who are interested in picking up something that identify what the American space would be, cultural space would be. And over here you see the head. So this is actually a figure laying down. There's sari cloth. There's Indian jewelry. There's an African bangle here, or elbow bracelets, which is the bracelet of currency. This particular figure references Durga, which is the god of war. And then you have the feathers, and again, the medicine bottles. And so one of the things that I began to be aware of is a lot of the invitations to do project centered around permanent collections that a museum would have. And so I'm listing some of these. The Peabody Essex Museum, for example, had a collection that I worked with. The museum in North Adams in Massachusetts, which we refer to as Mass MoCA, had invited me to do the first Taj Mahal, which is a pink one, but it also used furniture from Spina, which is in Boston, which had a collection of warehouses of objects that were the treasures of the country. So that's how my project began to develop into an interest in our history, and also in how these objects can facilitate a larger piece that is no longer about the objects themselves, but a transformation of those very static objects that meant something. And so they begin to speak to mean something new in the way they're constructed or assembled into a new art piece. And this was a very exciting thing for me to do, is to realize that objects, whether they're designated as a fixed thing, having a particular meaning, or something mundane, can all be assembled and redefined, relocated, and can then transmit new knowledge, talk about new things, new information. And we have this kind of plasticity with language, visual language, that we don't always have with the written. And this is a project with that pink Taj Mahal that I was talking to you about, that originated at Mass MoCA in 2003. And in 2011, I think, it was in the Museum Guimet, which is primarily an Asian museum in Paris. And in this first introductory room where you enter the museum, there is a wide open space to resemble a temple. And there are many sculptures in that room. And we began to take a series of 15 sculptures and place them throughout the museum to have it speak to the collection at hand. What you see here in the central position of that structure, which I reference as the Taj Mahal, is an Anglo-Indian chair. And this originated while out of two other projects in different museums in the U.S. Here I began to collect antiques myself, and this one was collected out of Boston. I think it was a captain's wife, and archiving how these very hybrid type of pieces could then speak to multiple cultures. There's a vintage globe here, an older globe, an older map that was from Vermont. And this chandelier of foliage and red moss that hangs to grow, almost like this overgrown foliage of a temple disregarded. This particular piece is very recent and was at the museum as well. It has these little Charlotte dolls that come up, and you saw in the very first image reoccur. The gourds, the fruit that I keep referring to, these tails, the vine, and the Anglo-Indian furniture, the shells that sprout and linger and create a floor pattern. Again, referencing the kind of structure that you would see in a temple with the relationship to the floor, the sky, and the ground, and the deity. This is a series of mannequin sculptures that is now at the museum in Denmark for a show there. And this particular piece was originated in the Museum Guimet. The Museum Guimet had a lot of stone sculptures of horses and antelopes, both in the two-dimensional work as well as in the statue form. And I had originally made this work for that conversation to take place, and later brought it to the Museum Arken in Denmark. You'll see again this use of discarded material here, the light bulbs. Ceramic, this is cowrie shells, the vials, which are kind of hard to see here, but feathers, horns, wool, the dress, the buffalo horns, some African, they're really musical instruments. So that would be an object, and this would be an object, and some things were created. This is some of my drawings. Again, I think in a lot of these drawings, I'm going to go backward actually. A lot of these drawings, you'll see that there is a sense of the hero and the battle and those that are fallen, and in many ways almost a religiosity to the way the battle is fought between good and evil. And certainly the move in scale between the smaller figures that are almost distraught or torn or transforming, and the larger figure, the planets as I saw them, droplets, all these things become metaphors in the work and reoccur, the planet Earth. This particular piece was also in the Guimet Museum during that time in 2011, and as you can see, there is the use of, again, oyster shells here. This is mink. This is an ostrich egg. The same use of the horns, as you see. And this is an inverted umbrella that is standing on its stand. It's not an actual umbrella, of course, but one that's fabricated. And so it's quite large. We began to really find that some of the work, as you can see, have this kind of early foundation where you see the drawing and before it has color. And so both the curator there and I began to consider the possibility of having an interaction between this more, both visually, but also in terms of how we understand the development of the bone before you have the development of color in a drawing. And this was the stairwell area. Again, use of the chair, the umbrella, altar lights, netting, light bulbs, horn, and then the figures beneath the floor dressing. So furniture became very much part of my dialogue, and I wanted this furniture to really speak to the body, because so often furniture is made for the body to interact with it in terms of its scale to be in the home. So it's the intimacy of furniture to the body that I really thought of the sculpture being figurative. This particular one uses old textiles here, and this kind of protrusion that takes place uses a lot of trim. There are some paintings here that are a little hard to see. So this references a deity, Ganesha, the elephant god. And so it has this fragmented quality that you would not traditionally find in the making of Indian deities, of course. So it's kind of like a hybrid in the way that I saw it, very much speaking of the deity, but having it emerge out of a Victorian chair. This particular piece is also more recent, and I think, again, the really preoccupation with objects, both traditional ones that I've been using, the horns, as you've seen before, but also the feet, the many arms, the doll, and the textile. And this is the back tail of it. And I think, lastly, I think I wanted to say a few words about writing a title. Sometimes the title is a way for me to reach the imagination of the viewer in order to lead. It may necessarily be explaining the work itself, but really talking about what I'm considering when looking at or making the work. And this again is an umbrella, and there are two whips that are joined. And this is a piece that fall into the idea of a branch, something that turns itself out into the space and has this growth or foliage or objects that linger with it. Of course, you've seen some of the pieces are deer and snake, and I've made turtles, and this one is a duck. And I think that one of the things that I really think about with the beginning of a piece, in this one I wanted to share, is I started out picking this up in Paris. It's a foie cup to have foie gras in, and it was in a tourist shop, and I bought the two, and that's what was the beginning of this piece. So, and then it became this kind of possible duck. Of course, the scale of it is a human head, and there's deer eyes, and there's I don't know what kind of ears even, and then shells and light bulbs and all these kinds of ornamentation that goes around, and of course the feathers that produce the body. The two eggs have two countries. They're in gold leaf, Africa on this side, and I think the other one was India. So it refers to this idea of the golden egg, the golden goose, another mythology. So there's always this kind of wrapping around actual history versus mythology that is separated from history itself. And these are forthcoming shows, and certainly some shows that are just current. And this is, again, that piece. There's some more of my work with the globe, as you see here, and the spoons and the light bulbs. And so many of these branch pieces have a feeling of this fruit, but also this tropical nature of this vegetation, the abundance and excess and the entanglement that takes place with these objects. And this entanglement is really about the entanglement of separate histories and how the languages that really speak to the symbolic nature of what I choose is not so difficult. It is very difficult to kind of detangle. some current panels and to give you an idea of the smaller works. So here I'm going to go through some of the more fairly current drawings. They range from 22 by 15 to 20 by 30. This image actually shares with you how I begin my drawings with the figure first, and then have everything else grow from it. But they also have this interest in making a figure that is not grounded, is floating, whether it's jumping or acrobatic or about to ascend. Some work, newer work that is in the studio. Rivers on ostrich eggs in a nest. This is a larger drawing, and I see over here, this is the detail that you see over here, and you can see the globe again. These are smaller drawings, about 20 by 15 and 20 by 11. And you'll see the changes in scale. There's a figure here and a figure here. So what is true is some of the drawings later on begin to show the net, the umbrella, the globe in them, a connection between the sculpture and the drawings. These are close-ups of drawings. This is 20 by 30. This is the monkey, with an interest in mythologies around monkeys as well as evolution in mind. Chinese lady doll. It's a close-up, and these are more close-ups. This is hooves. So you see, and this is some of the lace that I've kind of acquired in my travels, jewelry, the vials that we talked about, these objects, vessels. That's it. Thank you. Would anybody have any questions, or please feel free.
It's fascinating how you launch a project like that. How do the ideas come?
Well, I think part of what happens is one idea leads to another. So there really has to be an evolution in order for you to even desire to do the next piece. So it isn't really so much a light bulb goes on and then you do the work. With everything, you know, the more involved you are, it seems a conversation within itself. But you're also conversing with a community of people. So really considering what hasn't been considered is part of, you know, the journey of becoming interested in something. You know, what hasn't been shared. I definitely feel that I was always very curious about history because of my leaving my homeland, you know, and coming to the U.S. So having two histories in the sense, one adopted, one older, allows you to really think about what is history about, why do we have it, how do we make it? So it comes from that much more important place in how do we see ourselves through that history.
How did it come to you, this shape of the umbrella, making your own shapes, not real umbrellas, artifices of umbrellas, just the shapes of the umbrella itself? And the other one is, would you say that your sculptures are multidimensional collages?
Thank you. Well, the first question is easier to talk about. I think it was a small detail that was a private detail about my own history. Is I was born in Calcutta, so I'm actually Bengali, and I speak Bengali language. And one of the things that is a colonial trophy, so to speak, of that place is this black umbrella that gentlemen carry with them, with this little linen cloth on their shoulder. And for all of India, this represents a true Bengali gentleman to carry that umbrella. So in a sense, that identity formation centers around this object that maybe not very many people would know about. And at the same time, I think the umbrella is one of those things that are accessory in the colonial period through empire, from parasol to, a rain umbrella. That protection that is both personal and around the body. So for many women during that time, the umbrella kind of, and you can visit this in the literature when you read about fashion around the umbrella, it really talked about how this umbrella could secure a private space for the lady when moving in the public. So I began to really then think of it through this history of fashion, and then later on considered the diaspora as being umbrella term in which anyone who is not grounded in their home culture and has connections or leanings through migration can be in this umbrella. So it became a metaphor of diaspora and a metaphor of migration, the umbrella. That it is this idea of naming itself or nomenclature that becomes difficult when people migrate. So where do you come from becomes a problematic question when you have so many references. And that's very much the hardship of seeing the future as a place that is full of so many migrations. Is it useful to then talk about one particular or one hierarchical place as the beginning of your beginning? So the umbrella comes both in the sculpture and in the drawing, but I think the difference is that in the sculpture I have the dome, and so the umbrella and the dome begin to merge, while the dome represents for me more ancient culture. It also has references to a symbolic space, so that the White House is a dome and the banks have these domes. So there's some importance attributed to it, but also because it's an organic shape and it resembles our own temple, the temple of our head. So these references talk about both the object, the language of how we use those objects in the way we speak of them. So if you reference the dome as a temple, it opens up access to thinking about that dome in a more sacred space. So those kinds of references always feed into the work and what they can mean for both myself and the viewer and our own history. And while we're very invested in separating East and West, there is that larger history of the past and the present and what's in between and what's in the future that can be centered around understanding these forms and how they relate to our body. And then with your second question, I think I'm not sure if I understand it completely, about the collage aspect of... I'll try. I think collage is very important because for me, collage and the practice or process of it is in itself a kind of conceptual process, because the world is a collage. It's really not that linear in terms of being able to access it and understand how these tapestries, for example, relate to me, or relate to the other room. So even within the framework of a museum, if it could represent the world, is this collage of juxtapositions. And through multiple juxtapositions, we kind of define a comprehensive and more unified story. And I think history tries to do that. And it's harder and harder to do that in some sense because we have so many stories to include in our everyday life as we encounter the world more and more easily through access. And at the same time, when you encounter it often enough, it becomes very obvious that things are so overly connected with just the sheer numbers of things and numbers of languages and the number of mythologies. There is so much overlap in mythology that you begin to understand and accept, I think, and feel comfort with these juxtapositions. And there is in the sculpture my interest in making juxtapositions of, found objects versus store-bought objects an uncomfortable one too. It is an awkward, difficult mishmash of things that look like they could be garbage in some sense, or a flea market. And I think that's important in creating a space of that is a reality for us, that it becomes this larger arena of things collected. One person's collection, one person's language versus another. And how do you make relevant meaning out of that we can, walk away with from that? And that is just to find your own experience in the original object, which is the objects I've made out of the many things that have accumulated. And I think that's the importance of collage making, I think. You're welcome.
I think that also speaks to contemporary life and our interest now in repurposing. Objects, clothes, objects of art are not just one thing anymore. Before you know it, we've repurposed and it's something entirely different.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I do think about. We've come such a long way. Even within my own life, I think, my mom used to have just one kind of clothing, the kind of clothing you wear at home and the kind of clothing you wear outside. And now with the availability of things and the different roles we play in our life, there is this idea of, well, this is what I wear when I mow the lawn, and this is what I wear when I go shopping. This is what I wear to an opening, and this is what I wear to my studio. So I think as our lives get more complicated, and we also travel more, and not only travel more, but people who are in our neighborhoods become more easily accessible to us, we begin to consider more and more things for our own personal history as our own and not just visited. And I think that allows for that kind of a widening reference.
I have a question about the colors. They are so intense. Do you dye the fabrics, the feathers? The colors are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Because the problem with...
Do you have a specific technique for that?
Well, you do, depending, because I work with protein a lot, protein fibers, which are the feathers. I don't like synthetics usually because they do fade more easily. So I use very high grade dye that could be used outdoors even. In order for the work to be archival, they have to be hand dyed, which is a process in itself, yeah, you can get a lot more breadth and uniqueness in the color and complexity when you hand dye, just like painting. I think that's the one thing that I did learn from painting itself is the making of dyes. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you in San Diego with this incredible global view that you have of the world. So I wonder, I don't know if you've been to the San Diego Museum of Art before or whether you've had a chance to walk through our incredible Indian miniature collection and some of the Binny work here. But some of your impressions, I think, would be very interesting to all of us.
Yeah, I did go through some of the collection, but it's quite fast, so I probably need more time tomorrow. But I haven't come to the museum before or even seen this architecture. I mean, in New York, you have your, East Coast architecture. So this is quite a treat, and eye-opening to see this. And certainly the traditions that are here, the Spanish tradition, is very, very present. And so it's really kind of wonderful experience to be able to see them live.
Yes, and yet then we have this interesting Indian miniature collection, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this interesting Spanish architecture, but we've got this
Quite a big one.
amazing Indian presence too. So it's interesting to see how much of the global world is here, but maybe we don't even think about it like that, as you might see it.
Yeah, I think that's key to recognize that it is everywhere. It is in many of these collections already.
Am I allowed to ask one question? Do you do all this yourself, or do you have a crew, or?
We don't have a crew. Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good with working with teams of people. Yeah, it takes time, and I enjoy sewing. And it's a different way of making large work that has never been really considered enough, I feel. Yeah, I do the upholstery. I learned it myself. I've always been interested in stretching fabric, I guess. And it's hard work, but I'm sure in time that I'll probably need some help. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.